Welcome to week 5, the management of events and entertainment. The reading this week is about management in entertainment organizations. However, a bunch of this video is going to sort of catch up on last week and talk a little bit more about where we're going to go in the upcoming week. So, first off, you're going to have to complete a questionnaire or read Chapter 7 and answer some questions on Tuesdays. This is the subject of this video. Friday's class will be kind of jam-packed in that we have a guest speaker, Vince Bozzo. He's the general manager of the Scotiabank Arena, and he's going to talk about his role in that capacity and some big events that they've hosted there in the last couple of years. And then we're going to get into the business of events and entertainment talks. This will be our first ones that we've had. We have one about touring and one about the show development process, and we're going to fall into an activity about the business model canvas for the last, hopefully, 20 minutes, but it'll be something that you guys as a team can work on. So just to follow up from last week, want to review with you the activity that you guys worked on. The online activity last week was related to Times Square, and it was an interview with their vice president, and it was meant to be a good example of sort of the drip method and understand how an event will use public relations to continue to build awareness and generate different ticket sales and things like that. So what was interesting was when I sort of dug into this question a little bit more, and I put out the New Year's Eve and Times Square as kind of the event. It is, one of the world's most visited tourist attractions. So I thought that was interesting. They get 50 million visitors annually with around 330,000 people per day. What was most interesting to me was that the Times Square is a business improvement area. And we think of Times Square as a location in New York City, but the people that host the event, the people that organize it, are a business improvement area. And for those of you that don't know what a business improvement area is, it's an area within which businesses are required to pay an additional tax or levy in order to fund projects within the districts or boundaries. They go by a bunch of different names. They're called BIDs, BRZs, CIDs, SSAs. There's a bunch of acronyms there that you can see. But essentially what they are is a region. So all the landowners around Times Square get together and say, listen, city of New York City, we want to pay extra taxes for our land, and we want to use those funds towards basically building up the district in the area. So many of you may be familiar in the city of Toronto as an example. So Toronto is home to 83 different business improvement areas. So, and in fact, Ryerson sits in one. Ryerson sits in something that you call the Downtown Yonge. And as part of Downtown Yonge, they program events at Yonge and Dundas Square. They have additional waste collection teams that make sure the garbage is cleaned up. They do things to make sure the street improvements in the area. And they also host events. So other very popular ones in Toronto are things like the Danforth Village, which hosts the Greek Festival. Liberty Village is an area that's very popular. And then Financial District. So just in Toronto alone, there's 160 events that are put on by these different groups, and over 7.4 million people attend them, so it's quite significant. Why I like to bring up the idea of the business improvement areas, because actually this is a phenomenon that started in Toronto and started in an area called Bloor West Village, which is Bloor Street between Jane and Runnymede. And it started in the early 1970s, and at that time what was happening in sort of real estate and shopping was the shopping mall was started. So instead of people staying in their communities and shopping locally, people were driving to the shopping mall, parking at the shopping mall, and shopping there. So they started an entrepreneur living in Bloor West Village, started this thing called Business Improvement Areas. And it's become global today. So what started in a small neighborhood in Toronto is now literally, there's thousands of them around the world. There's not a major city that doesn't have one. And they're quite popular, they're very effective, and there's a whole bunch of them in the city of Toronto. So the business improvement area that surrounds Times Square and that hosts the annual event is called the Times Square Business Improvement Area. And you know, they're what's interesting when you look at their themselves as an organization. They get about 70% of the revenue from assessment, so from taxes. So the local landowners pay additional taxes on the real estate taxes every year. They also get about 16% of their revenue through sponsorships. And when you think about it, that probably makes sense, because there's, you know, 300,000+ people walking through there a day. If they do some sort of signage or some sort of media, it can really attract a lot of money. And you know, they also get some money from program income from different things that they do. As far as then their expenses, they spend a lot of their money on sanitation, which is basically making sure that Times Square is clean and well kept. They keep money on public safety, so they'll have their own police or their own security presence to make sure people feel safe in the area. And then you see the area that we're kind of talking about in our sort of course is they spend on events and programming. And the big event you guys looked at was primarily the New Year's Eve gala at Times Square, but they also do other events. And if you look at what the events are being used for and why they host events, is they want to draw people into the area, into the Times Square area, and improve the attractiveness to improve shopping and visiting and for people to do business. So the landowners deem this good, and events are used as a strategy to do it. We talked about it for the video you watched, sort of used as a great example of the drip method. So the Times Square Business Improvement Area hosts New Year's Eve in Times Square, and when they do it, they literally basically the day after day after Christmas, they start to do different events each day leading up to the event to drive awareness and attract people to the event. So they start out with their Duracell number delivery. They do a confetti wish event, and they do the Waterford Crystal announcement. So each day they do a different activity leading up to what is New Year's Eve. Now, some interesting stuff when you look at the event New Year's Eve in Times Square. It attracts 1 million people in that square, and a TV audience of 1 billion. It's their marquee event. It drives awareness. It drives traffic to their location, and is something that really, really uses an event effectively for the area. The other activity that you guys did online was we looked at a couple of different videos. And the videos were really with regards to examples of crisis communications or examples of events that had crises. And you watched 2 different videos for that. One event was the Love Parade in Germany, and then there was another video that was in a compilation of different events, and there was like 10 different events. And all of them are great examples of crises and where crisis communication is happened. And I think they represent a lot of good themes for people to try to understand the events business. You know, when we looked at the 10 different events that were featured in the video, you can see some really common themes as far as crisis. You know, some of the more significant ones where more people died were fires. But you can see one of the most common things at events that causes a crisis is crowd control. And basically making sure that people don't get trampled. So you've got to really have a significant plan to be ready for things like that. You need to be aware of it. So speaking of crowd control, I wanted to bring up a couple of things. I dug a little deeper. I wanted to bring you guys awareness. You know, number one thing that you got to do in crowd control is have enough security and staffing. You've got to research the type of show in the audience, who's coming to attend, and what are their behaviors usually. So are they doing drugs? Are they doing alcohol? Are they sort of a more aggressive set? Are they younger? Are they older? Those types of things. You've got to have the tools to do the job. So you need communications technology to talk to your security officers throughout the event in case you have to do certain things. The third one on the list is to throttle people in. So screen people at entrances to make sure that they don't have any devices that can cause harm, but also to meter them in so that you don't have mad rushes for people getting in. And the very last one was barriers and access. So you're going to use barricades to control crowds. You're going to use barriers that basically keep the crowd away from the stage. So they're like 10 or 15 feet off stage, so they're not too close to the artists in space like that. Came across a really good article that talks about, an academic article that talks about crowd control. What was really good is these researchers interviewed event experts to understand sort of what crowd control is, how it works, and they created the following model. And what I really thought was useful in the model, and having worked in the events industry for a long time, 90% of crowd control issues start in pre-planning. So before the crowd arrives, before the event, you've done an entire plan. And then only 10% of your time you're spending executing it. So when you look at the activities under crowd control, the things that's really important is before you have an event, as an example, we had a speaker last week talking about a rock concert coming to our venue. Well, before that rock concert comes to the venue, months in advance or weeks in advance, they would call the past venues to understand who's the profile of the visitor, right? How old are they? Do they drink a lot? Do they do lots of drugs? Is there lots of security arrests? They would be looking at looking at their venue and how many staff do they need to run it? How do they want to run it? What are those types of things? And then there's the execution stage on the day of that they put in place. So some interesting perspectives, but you can see it all starts with the planning. So this Friday's activity, we've got a couple guests. We've got a guest speaker. We've got 2 presentations, so we'll have about 20 minutes. The activity, what we're going to do is rather than start a new activity or a new thing, we're going to actually look at the Edinburgh Festival, and we're going to review that. I'm going to go back in and have you polish it up and redo some things. Overall, there's some teams that did a good job of it, but for the most part, most of the business model canvases needed some work, and I had a challenge really evaluating them. So I want to really use this as an opportunity to talk about the business model canvas more and what some minimum expectations are of the work on a business model canvas that you guys will be doing. Here's some things that I found challenging when I was sort of evaluating them. The first one was and this is my fault, I had you guys submitting it through a Google form. I found it very difficult to match student names and the technology to sort of make it so that I could evaluate it and get it into your grade book. So I'm going to move the submission into a D2L assignment versus using for the future, I'm going to use that versus using a Google form. The other thing I found challenging was Friday at noon. So the deadline was to submit Friday at noon, and we have a class at 4 o'clock. And I've got office hours in there plus other meetings. So what we're going to do is we're going to make, if we do a business model canvas, we'll introduce it in Friday, but it'll be due Tuesday at 8 a.m. because then I can have the time to review it and digest it and build the lecture, the discussion on Friday around it. There was a significant variability in the detail and information presented. So some teams had lots of details, some didn't. So as an example, with financials, some had they sell tickets, and some had 60 to 70% of the revenue came from tickets, and it was $10 million. So some had a lot of significant detail and some didn't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to establish a bare minimum if you are going to be doing a business model canvas of the things I expect that are a must to have in there. The grading for the first 2, both, so I did one on the CNE, you've done them on CNE, and you've done them on Edinburgh. I found I was very subjective on it if I was going to actually grade it. I ended up actually just grading you guys based on solely the fact you did it, which is good, but doesn't set you up for success when this is going to be one of your final projects worth 15% of your grade. So I'm going to grade the first 2 on that, but I'm going to set some expectations for the future. Some other frustrations that I had is some of you did the International Festival for Edinburgh, and some of you did the Fringe Festival in Edinburgh. So for this time, I'm going to basically send out a link saying you have to do the Edinburgh International Festival. I mean, the confusing thing is they both happen at the same time. They're both somewhat similar in they're both forms of entertainment. They're both happen in Edinburgh. They both happen at the same time. I'm going to make sure that everybody does the same festival so that we're all on the same page when we do our business model canvas. The other one is I found some teams when they are doing their business model canvas, it's like a copy and paste of stuff from the annual report. If I wanted to copy and paste, I wanted you to copy and paste, I'd ask you to copy and paste. I want you to be thinking about what should go in there. So I'm going to be talking a lot, and I'll introduce this on Fridays. I want you to, when you are maybe talking about revenues, I want you to focus on the 3 to 5 things that really drive the revenues. If it's stakeholders, I want you to focus on the top 3 to 5 stakeholders that really make a difference, and not just individual stakeholders. I want you to think of it in categories of stakeholders. So I'll talk about that on Friday a little more. The value propositions in general, it's the first time I'm teaching this. I also get it that people maybe, I think we've got to do some work on that. So I'm going to basically do a workshop before reading week, the Friday. We don't have any guest speaker coming, but we're going to spend an entire, basically almost a full hour building a value proposition for an event. We're going to basically, this is the Edinburgh Festival. This is the annual report. I will send out the link for you, and I want you to sort of look at that before you come to class on Friday. And if you didn't do that one, make sure that you're ready to do that one for your business model canvas. And if you did, be ready to expect some improvements that I will suggest for you. Also briefly talked about on Friday is you'll get an advance notice this week. It'll be about a 2 or 3 day window at most to register for the Business of Music Festivals event. It's free. It will be happening the end of February on a Thursday night from 5 to 7 p.m. A great list of speakers from 3 of the sort of leading businesses in live music festivals in Canada. They probably represent more than 50 to 70% of the revenue generated in Canada for music festivals. So we'll have a look at some of the different organizations there. Great event for you to come out to, though. So keep an eye on it. We will, after our window in advance, go out to other schools and other programs, so we expect it to sell out. Upcoming the following week 6, so we have only we have 2 weeks before rating week. Week 5 is what we're coming into. We're going to be going into week 6 the following week. It's going to be about human resources and artist management. We'll have that'll be the Tuesday's video. There will also be Friday's class. I have no guest speaker, so we're going to have 2 talks, 2 business of event talks. And then we're going to also get into the Shaw Festival, and we're going to look at I'll send out links in advance so you've got a chance to look at their annual report and a couple of other reports. We're going to focus on creating a unique value proposition. That's about it for now for this Tuesday morning. I look forward to seeing you guys on Friday. In the meantime, have a great rest of your week. Thanks a lot. Bye.